My name is Elena Torres, and I am 31 years old, a wife and a mother, trying to keep a small family steady in a world that often feels uncertain. I live with my husband Marco and our 4-year-old son Lucas in a quiet rented apartment on the third floor of an aging building that always smells faintly of dust and boiled rice. Marco is 37, and for most of our marriage, he worked for a construction company across the city. He left home early every morning wearing the same faded boots and came back each evening with tired shoulders and hands rough from cement and tools. The money he earned was never much, but it paid the rent, the electricity, the bus fares, and the groceries we bought carefully each week. We did not buy new clothes unless something was completely worn out, and restaurants were places we passed the street rather than entered. Still, I felt secure because Marco had steady work, and steady work meant stability. For 6 years, our life followed the same quiet rhythm. Marco worked long days while I stayed home, caring for Lucas, cooking simple meals, and stretching every coin until it lasted the entire month. Some evenings, we would sit by the small kitchen window and talk about the future in soft, hopeful voices, so our son would keep sleeping. Marco dreamed of earning a promotion one day, maybe becoming a supervisor instead of lifting heavy beams all day. I never asked for much, only that we remain safe together, and that Lucas could grow up with more chances than we had. One evening, near the beginning of spring, Marco came home earlier than usual, and his eyes carried a rare spark of excitement. He dropped his bag beside the door, lifted Lucas into the air, and laughed in a way I had not heard for months. When our son ran back to his toys, Marco sat across from me at the kitchen table and said quietly that his boss had spoken to him about a promotion. My heart jumped with surprise, and a small, fragile joy began to bloom inside me. Marco explained that the company planned to open a new project, and they needed someone responsible, someone who understood the workers and the schedules. His boss had told him that next month the position might become his if everything continued well. For the first time in years, we allowed ourselves to imagine a little extra money. Not luxury, not big dreams, just simple things that suddenly felt possible. I pictured buying a blue dress I had once seen in a shop window, and maybe planning a small birthday celebration for Lucas with a cake and colorful candles. Marco smiled while watching my face, as if my happiness alone made the future brighter. For several days, we carried that hope quietly between us like a warm secret. Marco left for work each morning, standing a little taller than before, and I found myself humming while washing dishes. Even the narrow apartment seemed lighter, as if the walls themselves believed our life might finally grow easier. But hope can be delicate. 2 weeks later, Marco walked through the door one evening with a face so serious that my stomach tightened instantly. He did not greet Lucas with laughter. He did not take off his boots right away. Instead, he sat slowly at the table and pressed his hands together as though the weight of something invisible rested on his shoulders. I asked what was wrong, and he lifted his eyes toward me with a confusion that frightened me. Finally, he spoke, saying the company had decided to close several offices because there was not enough work anymore. His voice trembled when he admitted that they had let him go that very afternoon. For a moment, the room felt silent and distant, as if the world outside our window had stopped moving. Lucas continued playing on the floor, unaware that the ground beneath our life had suddenly shifted. I reached for Marco's hand and held it tightly, even though fear had already begun spreading quietly through my chest. He looked ashamed, as though losing the job meant he had failed us. I forced my voice to stay calm and told him that he would find another position soon. Inside, however, my thoughts raced through every bill waiting on our kitchen shelf. Rent, electricity, school fees, food bus fares. Everything suddenly felt heavier than before. That night, after Marco finally fell asleep, I lay awake listening to the slow breathing of my husband and child. In the darkness, I promised myself that somehow our family would endure whatever came next. Morning arrived quietly, but the worry remained sitting beside me like an uninvited guest. Marco woke early and began searching for work, immediately sending applications to every company he could find online or through old coworkers. I watched him from the kitchen while preparing breakfast and saw determination mixed with a fear he tried hard to hide. Before leaving for his first interview, he kissed Lucas on the head and promised us everything would be all right. I smiled for him, but when the door closed behind him, the apartment felt larger and colder than it ever had before. I cleaned the room slowly that morning, thinking about the uncertain days ahead and wondering how long our small savings could protect us. Yet deep inside, I knew this was only the beginning of a difficult chapter in our life together, one that would test our patience, courage, and love in ways we had never imagined before. Still, the story of that season had not yet revealed its hardest moments or the quiet strength we would discover within ourselves while trying to hold our family together. Only later would I understand how fragile hope can feel before it slowly begins to grow stronger again through patience, work, faith, and love combined. The first few days after Marco lost his job passed with a strange sense of determination. Every morning, he woke up before the sun, dressed neatly, and sat at the small table with his phone and laptop searching for openings. I could see the seriousness in his eyes as he wrote messages and sent applications. At first, I believed something would appear quickly. Marco had always been hardworking, reliable, and respected by the people he worked with. I told myself that a man like him would not remain unemployed for long. The first week passed, and then the second. Marco attended several interviews, each one filling us with cautious hope. Every time he returned home, I tried to read his face before he even spoke. Sometimes he would shrug and say they would call later. Other times, he simply said they chose someone else. I kept smiling and encouraging him, but with each passing day, our savings quietly began to shrink. Money had always been limited in our home, but now every purchase felt like a difficult decision. At the market, I walked slowly between the stalls, calculating every coin before placing anything in my basket. Meat became rare on our table. I learned how to cook filling meals from the cheapest ingredients I could find. Rice, beans, and vegetables appeared again and again in different forms, so Lucas would not notice how little variety we had. At night, Marco often sat silently on the couch, staring at the television without really watching it. I knew he was thinking about our situation, even when he tried to appear calm. The weight of responsibility rested heavily on him, and I could see the quiet shame growing inside him with each rejection. A month passed, and our savings had nearly disappeared. The landlord reminded us that rent would soon be due again. Lucas needed new shoes because the soles of his old pair were almost completely worn through. Instead of buying new ones, I carefully stitched the edges and told him they looked stronger than before. He smiled and believed me. One afternoon, my friend Sophia came to visit. She had known me for many years and could easily see the exhaustion behind my polite smile. While we drank tea in the kitchen, she watched me prepare dinner and suddenly said something that surprised me. "You cook so well, Elena," she said thoughtfully. "Why don't you sell some of your food online? People love homemade meals." At first I laughed because the idea felt impossible. I had never run a business, and our kitchen was barely large enough for our own family. But Sophia insisted that many people ordered food from home cooks now. She told me I could start small, maybe just a few dishes each week. After she left, I thought about her suggestion for a long time. That evening, when Marco returned from another unsuccessful interview, I carefully shared the idea with him. He listened quietly and shook his head. "You already do everything here," he said gently. "You take care of Lucas, the house, and me. You don't need to work too." His words were kind, but I could hear the sadness behind them. He wanted to protect me from more responsibility. Still, I knew our situation demanded action. "I'm not replacing you," I told him softly. "It will only help us until you find something better." Marco hesitated before finally agreeing. I could tell he felt uncomfortable, but he trusted me enough to try. The next day, I cooked several dishes that I knew people liked and took pictures with my phone. My hands trembled slightly when I posted them online with a short message offering homemade meals for delivery. I expected nothing to happen. To my surprise, 2 people ordered food that very week. The amount of money was small, but when I held those bills in my hands, I felt a spark of hope. Slowly, more orders began to appear. Some weeks I cooked for 3 families, sometimes 5. I woke early to prepare ingredients and stayed up late washing dishes after Lucas fell asleep. The kitchen became warm and noisy, with boiling pots and sizzling oil. My back often ached from standing all day, but every order meant groceries on our table. The money was helpful, but it could never replace Marco's old salary. We still struggled to cover every expense. When Lucas's school fees were due, I had to ask my mother for help, something that filled me with quiet embarrassment. 2 months passed this way. My days became long and exhausting. I cleaned the apartment, cooked large batches of food, answered messages from customers, and cared for Lucas all at the same time. Some nights I fell asleep in my chair before even reaching the bed. Marco continued searching for work every day. He attended interviews at construction companies, warehouses, restaurants, and even delivery services. Each rejection seemed to leave him more discouraged than before. Sometimes I noticed he spent longer hours sitting quietly with the television. I knew he was still applying for jobs, but the process had begun to drain his confidence. One evening, everything felt too heavy at once. I had received no food orders that day. The landlord had called asking about rent, and my hands burned from splashes of hot oil while cooking dinner. Lucas began crying in his room because he could not find his favorite toy. At that moment, Marco walked into the kitchen. I looked at him with tired eyes, and the frustration I had been holding inside suddenly burst out. Words escaped before I could stop them. "What are you doing, Marco?" I said sharply. "You promised you would find something. I work all day cooking and selling food, taking care of everything, and I'm still the one worrying about money." The moment the words left my mouth, I regretted them. But it was too late. Marco did not raise his voice. He simply stood there looking hurt and whispered that he was trying his best. His quiet response filled the room with a painful silence that made my anger feel suddenly small and shameful. I realized then how fragile we both had become. After my angry words filled the kitchen, the silence that followed felt heavier than anything we had faced before. Marco did not argue with me or try to defend himself. He simply lowered his eyes and nodded slowly, as if accepting a punishment he believed he deserved. Then he turned and walked out of the apartment without another word. I stood there holding the wooden spoon in my hand, my heart suddenly filled with regret. The oil on the stove continued to sizzle quietly, but my attention had already drifted to the door that had just closed behind him. Lucas had stopped crying in the other room, and the apartment felt strangely still. When I looked through the kitchen window, I saw Marco sitting on the old concrete stairs outside the building. His elbows rested on his knees, and his head hung low. From that distance, I could still see the disappointment in his posture. In that moment, I realized my anger had not solved anything. It had only added another burden to the man who was already struggling. I finished cooking dinner in silence and later put Lucas to bed. Marco returned after a while, and we spoke very little that night. The tension between us felt fragile, like thin glass that could break with the smallest movement. The next morning, I woke early and found Marco already sitting at the table. His phone lay beside him, and several job listings were open on the screen. He looked tired but focused. Before the day could begin, I spoke first. "I'm sorry for shouting last night," I said quietly. I was scared, and the fear came out as anger. Marco looked up at me, and after a moment, he nodded. "You were right about one thing," he said softly. "I need to do more. I've been waiting for the right job instead of accepting any work that comes." That day, Marco changed his approach. Instead of focusing only on construction positions, he began applying everywhere he could think of. He called small businesses, restaurants, delivery companies, and warehouses. He even visited several places in person to ask if they needed help. In the afternoon, he stopped by a small restaurant and offered to work as a cleaner. Later, he applied for a taxi company that needed drivers. None of these jobs were what he had once imagined for himself, but he understood now that pride could not feed a family. Days turned into weeks again. Some employers promised to call him back, but never did. Others said they had already filled the position. Each evening, Marco returned home, looking tired but determined. During this time, I continued my small food business. Some weeks were better than others. A few loyal customers began ordering regularly, which helped keep our kitchen busy. The work remained exhausting, but I felt proud knowing I was contributing something important to our survival. One morning, just as I finished packing several lunch orders, Marco's phone rang. He answered quickly and listened carefully. When he hung up, he looked both excited and nervous. "It's an interview," he said. "A small factory needs workers. They want to meet me today." For a moment, he stood there silently, staring at the floor. "What if they say no again?" he whispered. "I don't think I can handle another rejection." I walked over and held his hands firmly. "Go anyway," I told him. "Even if it's a small opportunity, go and try." He hesitated, still uncertain. Finally, I placed his coat in his hands and pushed him gently toward the door. You won't know unless you try, I said. When he left, the apartment felt quiet again. I tried to continue cooking, but my thoughts kept returning to the interview. I imagined what I would say if he came home disappointed again. I planned new ways to increase my food orders. I counted our remaining coins several times. 3 long hours passed before I heard the door open. Marco stepped inside looking tired, and for a second my heart sank. I assumed the answer had been no once again. Then suddenly he smiled. "They gave me the job," he said. For a moment I could not speak. Tears filled my eyes before I even realized they were coming. I hugged him tightly while Lucas ran around us laughing without fully understanding why we were so happy. The job was not the promotion we had once dreamed about. The salary was smaller than his previous position, and the work involved learning unfamiliar machines in a noisy factory. But it was honest work, and it meant a steady paycheck would return to our home. The following weeks were not magically easy. We still counted every coin when shopping for groceries. We still checked prices carefully at the market. I continued cooking meals for my customers, and Marco spent long days learning his new responsibilities. But something important had changed between us. The fear we carried before was now shared instead of hidden. Sometimes Marco came home exhausted, and we argued briefly about money or small frustrations. Yet those arguments never lasted long, because we understood how much effort each of us was making. One evening after dinner, Marco sat beside me and spoke quietly. "I was ashamed to tell you how hopeless I felt during these months," he admitted. "Every rejection made me feel smaller." I squeezed his hand gently. "You don't have to carry those feelings alone," I told him. "We are a family. We face problems together." Life remained simple, but slowly the tension that once filled our home began to fade. A month later, after saving a little extra money, I finally bought a modest dress for myself from a discount shop. It was not expensive or fancy, but when I wore it for the first time, I looked in the mirror and felt something I had almost forgotten. I felt like myself again. Looking back now, I understand that difficult seasons can test a family in painful ways. Fear, exhaustion, and uncertainty can create cracks in even the strongest relationships. But patience, honesty, and teamwork can slowly repair those cracks. Our life did not become perfect, but it became stronger. And sometimes strength is the most valuable thing a family can build together. Thank you for reading our story. If you enjoyed this story and want to improve your English while listening to meaningful stories like this one, please support my YouTube channel English Parlor. Like the video, leave a comment, share it with friends, and subscribe to English Parlor for more English stories that help you learn and grow. Your support means a lot and helps this community continue sharing simple stories with powerful lessons.